I need to tell you something about loneliness that most people do not know. It is not an emotion, it is a physiological state. When the human brain experiences loneliness, persistent, chronic loneliness, it responds the same way it responds to a physical threat. It activates the stress response, it raises cortisol, it increases inflammation throughout the body, it suppresses immune function, it alters sleep architecture, and it does all of this continuously, every day. For as long as the loneliness persists, the research on what chronic loneliness does to the body is extraordinary, and it is almost completely unknown to the people it most affects. Today I am going to tell you what loneliness actually does inside the brain and the body, why it is one of the most significant health risks facing seniors right now, and what the research says actually helps beyond the obvious advice of simply seeing more people. Stay until the end, because the last thing I share today is the finding that surprised me most in all the research I have reviewed on this subject, and it changes how you think about connection completely. Let me tell you about a patient I will call Margaret, 73 years old, widowed 4 years ago, 2 adult children who both live more than 2 hours away, previously socially active, book club, church group, regular lunches with friends. After her husband died, the social world contracted, gradually at first, then faster. The book club felt different without her husband knowing she was going. The lunches felt effortful. The church group was kind, but she felt separate from the couples and families there. Within 18 months, Margaret was spending most days alone. Not dramatically, not in crisis, just quietly, gradually alone. When she came to see me, her blood pressure had increased significantly despite no change in her medication. Her fasting blood sugar had worsened. She was sleeping poorly and waking frequently. Her memory felt less sharp than it had been, and she had had 2 colds in the previous 3 months, unusual for her. Her blood tests showed elevated inflammatory markers. Her immune response was reduced. Nothing was dramatically wrong. No single diagnosis explained it. But the pattern across multiple systems was clear to me. I asked her directly, "How much time do you spend with other people?" She looked at the table for a moment. Then she said, "Not much." "Not anymore." I told her what I am about to tell you. What was happening in her body was not primarily about her age. It was not primarily about her weight or her diet or her medication. It was about what loneliness does to the human body when it persists for months and years. Here is what the research shows. In plain words, the human brain evolved in groups. For the vast majority of human history, being alone meant being in danger. Separated from the tribe meant vulnerable to predators, vulnerable to starvation, vulnerable to threat. The brain therefore treats persistent social isolation as a threat signal, not consciously, automatically, below awareness. And when the brain detects a persistent threat, it activates the systems designed to protect the body from that threat. Cortisol rises. This is the body's stress hormone. Short-term cortisol is useful. It mobilizes energy. It sharpens focus. It prepares the body to act. But chronic elevated cortisol day after day, week after week, is destructive. It breaks down muscle tissue. It impairs memory consolidation during sleep. It increases blood sugar. It raises blood pressure. And over time it damages the structure of the hippocampus, the part of the brain most critical for memory and spatial navigation. Inflammation increases. The immune system shifts into a state of chronic low-grade alert. White blood cells produce more inflammatory proteins. These proteins circulate through the body and affect every organ system: the heart, the joints, the brain, the kidneys. This is the same chronic inflammation we discuss in the context of poor diet, physical inactivity, and disease. Loneliness produces it just as reliably, just as persistently, just as harmfully. The immune system changes. Research from University College London found that lonely older adults showed specific changes in immune cell function, a shift toward patterns associated with reduced ability to fight infection and increased susceptibility to illness. The lonely seniors in the study got sick more often, recovered more slowly, and showed immune profiles that resembled people under sustained physical stress. Sleep is disrupted. The brain under a perceived threat does not allow deep sleep. It stays partially alert, monitoring, listening for danger. In lonely seniors, this produces the pattern we see clinically: trouble falling asleep, frequent waking, poor quality sleep that leaves the person unrefreshed. And poor sleep in turn amplifies inflammation, worsens memory, and increases cortisol. The cycle reinforces itself. The cardiovascular system is affected. A major review published in a leading cardiology journal found that social isolation and loneliness were associated with a 29% increased risk of heart disease and a 32% increased risk of stroke, independent of other known cardiovascular risk factors. Independent, meaning even when researchers controlled for blood pressure, cholesterol, weight, smoking, and physical activity, the loneliness effect on the heart remained. The brain itself changes. Multiple longitudinal studies that followed the same people over many years, found that lonely older adults showed faster rates of cognitive decline and significantly higher rates of dementia compared to socially connected older adults. The mechanism is partly through the chronic inflammation affecting brain tissue, and partly through a more direct effect. The brain, like muscle, requires regular activation to maintain its connections, social interaction, conversation, shared experience. The cognitive demands of reading other people is one of the most powerful activators of multiple brain systems simultaneously. Without it, those systems receive less stimulation, and less stimulated neural connections gradually weaken. Now here is the finding that surprised me most. Research from the University of Chicago examined the difference between two types of social experience. The first was quantity of social contact, how many people someone saw, how often they had interactions. The second was quality of social contact, how meaningful those interactions felt, whether the person felt genuinely seen, understood, and valued. The finding was striking. Quantity of social contact predicted health outcomes somewhat. Seeing more people somewhat reduced the physiological effects of loneliness. But quality of social contact predicted outcomes far more strongly. A single relationship in which a person felt genuinely understood and valued had more protective effect on the inflammatory markers, the cortisol levels, and the cognitive outcomes than multiple superficial interactions. This means the answer to loneliness is not simply to see more people, it is to find or deepen the relationships in which you feel genuinely known. One real conversation each week in which you are fully present, speaking honestly, and feeling heard, is more protective to the biology of the aging brain and body than attending multiple events where you are present but not truly connected. What this means practically: Margaret did not need a medication change. She needed what her biology was signaling it was missing. We discussed three things. The first was identifying one relationship she had allowed to drift, that had previously felt real and reciprocal. Not a large social group. One person, someone who knew her before the loss. Someone with whom she had previously felt genuinely herself. She called that person. They began meeting fortnightly. The second was finding one activity that combined purpose with regular contact with others. Not socializing for its own sake, which felt effortful, but doing something she actually cared about alongside other people. She volunteered one morning a week at a local library. The third was having an honest conversation with her daughter about how she was actually spending her days, not to burden her daughter, but because the concealment of loneliness, the performance of being fine, was itself adding to the cognitive and emotional load. Her daughter began a weekly video call that was genuinely engaged, not a check-in, a conversation. 6 months later, Margaret's inflammatory markers had reduced, her blood pressure was better managed, her sleep had improved, her cold susceptibility reduced. One new prescription had not changed. Her medication had not changed. Her biology had changed in response to what it had been signaling it needed. Your action steps from today. 1. Honestly assess how many genuinely connected interactions you have each week. Not appearances, connections, moments where you felt known and heard. If the answer is very few, that is not a personal failure. It is a health finding, and it deserves as much attention as a blood pressure reading. 2. Identify one relationship that has drifted that once felt real. Make contact this week. Not a long, difficult conversation, just contact, a message, a call, an invitation. 3. Find one activity that combines something you care about with regular contact with other people, not for the socialization itself, for the purpose and the incidental connection that comes with shared purpose. 4. If you have a family member who seems fine but has become quieter, less engaged, more withdrawn, do not accept fine at face value. Ask a more specific question, not how are you? How are you actually spending your days? What did you do yesterday? Who did you speak to today? Those specific questions create the space for honest answers that generic check-ins do not. 5. Share this video, not with someone you think is lonely, with everyone, because loneliness is hidden by design. The people who need this most will not identify themselves as lonely. They will simply watch it and recognize themselves quietly. Margaret asked me once why nobody had ever told her that being alone was doing this to her body. I did not have a good answer. Now you have been told. Subscribe for new videos every week. Information that your appointment does not have time to deliver. I will see you in the next one.